want to take you back a number of years to when I was little. Now, I don't think of myself as a violent person particularly, and I think most people who know me probably would not consider me a particularly violent person, but I do have a younger brother. I have a younger sibling. And one of the things that happens when you're little and you have a younger sibling is that sometimes you fight. And so my brother and I would fight, and this was back when he was a little bit smaller than I was, not quite as strong as I was. So we would fight for a little while, and I would fend him off until our dad would come and intervene. And so he'd come over to us, and he'd sort of listen, and we did what siblings normally do when you're called out on fighting. You blame it on the other person. You say, you're the one who started the fight. I didn't do anything. I'm just defending myself. And he would listen patiently to these arguments for a little bit, and then he'd stop us, and he'd say, are you part of the problem, or are you part of the solution? You're either helping to solve it, or you're contributing to the problem. So fortunately, we've both grown up. We are no longer fighting with each other. And so the immediacy of the problems, the immediacy of the issues that we're working with is not quite the same. It's not quite there anymore. But there's still a whole lot of problems out there. I wake up in the morning, I look at the headlines on the newspaper, and you see that there are rockets being launched back and forth between Israel and the Palestinians. You hear about bullying. You hear about homelessness and lack of opportunities, about the inequality of education in this city, the inequality of opportunity and outcomes for young people. And I think about the fact that there's so many young people who are making decisions that lead them to become statistics, become part of the problem instead of part of the solution. And so I look at all these questions, I listen to all these issues, and at times I want to just sort of do what I did with my brother. Oh, it's his fault. I don't have anything to do with it. Sort of curl into a little corner and say, it's not me. I don't want to worry about it. But then that question that my dad asked comes back to my mind. Are you part of the problem, or are you part of the solution? And that's the question that's really brought me here today and that's led me to the work that I do. I have the pleasure through LearnServe International of working with high school students from across the DC area and to really do exactly what I was just describing. Trying to think about or help them think about what are those issues, what are those problems, those things going on in their schools and communities that they think are not right, and then turning it back on them and saying, all right, well, what's your solution? How can you take action on this? How can you solve this issue? And I've had the fortune of working with a number of students, some of you have had the pleasure of meeting and hearing from earlier today, some who are in the audience right now. And then there are other students like Yasmin Arrington, whose mom passed away when she was just starting high school. Her dad has been in and out of prison for most of her life. And she was starting the college admissions process, and she realized that there weren't many scholarship opportunities for kids like her, children of incarcerated parents. And so Yasmin said, okay, well, what if I created a scholarship program for children of incarcerated parents? And 3 years later, Scholarships, CHIP standing for Children of Incarcerated Parents, is a thriving organization. Last June, they just gave out their first 8 college scholarships to children from this demographic. It started with an idea, started with a problem, ended up with a solution. Students like Jessica Yang, who had a passion for science and realized that the elementary schools and middle schools around her weren't doing a really good job of getting kids excited about science, going into those fields. And she said, hey, I bet we can do better. Organized a whole bunch of high school students, starting with Montgomery County, but it's since spread beyond there. And they said, all right, well, why don't we create our own curriculum and teach after-school science classes to kids to get them excited about this field, excited about these new opportunities. Several years later, she's now a sophomore in college, incidentally is president of her class, but more importantly, Kids Are Scientists 2 is now an official 501c3 nonprofit organization. She's operating in 4 states, about to launch in 3 more states. And again, it started from this one idea, I bet we could do better. I bet we could get more kids excited about science. And a student named Yoni Kalin, who actually lives, his family lives not too far from here, grew up right here in DC as well. And he was sitting at an Outback Steakhouse, playing with the little box of kids' crayons that they had put out on his table. And he just had that box of crayons there, maybe played with them a little bit, and at the end of the meal, the waiter came over, took that box, and threw it in the trash. He sort of stopped for a second. He said, well, that's stupid. I barely even used this. I barely even touched it. And saw that it was happening at all the other tables across the restaurant. And so Yoni talked to the waiter, talked to the manager, and ultimately arranged for a little gray collection bucket to be stuck in the back kitchen area there, where the waitstaff could drop off those crayons, and then he would come by, or one of his teammates would come by, pick up those crayons, and then donate them to daycare centers and elementary schools. And through that, an organization called Color My World was born It started just with one Outback Steakhouse, a few high school kids donating a bunch of crayons to local elementary schools, daycare centers, some the Rosemont Center right here over in Mount Pleasant. But it has since grown, and so now he's got teams of students in about 9 different states, and they've collected and donated more than 40,000 crayons. Now, what stood out for me with each of these examples is that they didn't necessarily set out to end poverty. They didn't set out to end hunger. They didn't set out to solve all the conflicts in the world. They took something that was very specific, very concrete, and said, all right, here's the problem. How can I be part of the solution? And all it took was one crayon, one insight, taking that first step, making that first phone call, and said, all right, how do we take this? How do we make something happen? And I think that's where it all begins, and it's not necessarily a straightforward path. And if you ask any of them how they got to the point of being successful, they would probably list off on both hands all the different times when they were not successful, when they failed, when they stumbled across the way, they got told no. But what they had was that focus and that passion and that idea of saying, hey, how can we take this and how can we make something happen? So what I want to leave you with today are 2 questions. And the first question is one that should be familiar for all of my students, and that question is, what pisses you off? What are those things that you say, that's not right, that shouldn't be this way, this is a problem that someone's got to solve, someone's got to do something about this? And then the second question, after you figured out what that issue is, what that thing is that pisses you off, the second question is, how are you going to be part of the solution?